This is Ozzy, and he's going to remind you how to do the regular verbs that you learned last year in French 1. So you might have forgotten some of them. I think as you start seeing them again, you'll have some reminders. The ones that you did the most and that they're the most common are the ER verbs. So we're going to focus on those first, and then we'll do a separate recording with the second part of the slideshow with RE and IR verbs. So these are regular because once you learn one ER verb, you can do all of them. So we want to focus on, okay, can I do one? Then what do they mean? Because we don't want to just learn forms and then we can't use them. We have to know what they mean so we can use them in sentences that make sense and then apply it to everything else. So let's start with an ER verb that you did last year. So thank you, Ozzy. So let's look at parler, an example of an ER verb. Once you can do this, you can do all the other verbs that have ER at the end of them. You remember what parler means? To speak, right? So how do you form any ER verb? You take off the ER, and then you're going to add a different ending each time. Okay, so we have je parle, tu parles, il parle, or elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle. So every time it's je, we're going to take off the ER and we're going to put an E. Every time it's tu, we're going to take off the ER and put ES. Every time it's il or elle, we're going to take off the ER and put an E. Every time it's nous, ONS. Every time it's vous, EZ. And every time it's il or elle plural, ENT. Remember how many of these sound exactly the same? Last year in French 1, you might have drawn a boot around these four because they all have the same pronunciation. Parle. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, il parle. This is super important. Remember that every time there's an ENT at the end of a verb, it's always silent. So these all sound the same. Parle. Only two are different or outside the boot. Nous parlons, vous parlez. So you can do this with any other verb that ends with ER. Take off the ER and add these endings to that verb. For example, before we do more examples, one tiny exception. Verbs such as manger, nager, and voyager that you did last year, because they end with GER, they have the special, we're going to call it magic E, that stays in the new form for pronunciation. So they all look like what we just did. E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. But in the new form, we're not going to take off the ER before we add the ONS, just the R. And it's for pronunciation. So because if we don't put the E here, it's mangon. But we need, the verb is manger, so we need to keep it manger. So that's going to be the magic E. So here's a bunch of other verbs that you know so far. There might be a couple new ones here, but some really common ones for us. Manger, étudier, écouter, regarder, nager, jouer, parler, voyager, inviter, organiser, habiter, aimer, visiter, dîner, chanter, danser, travailler, téléphoner. So any of these that you don't think you remember the meaning, you want to study them as vocabulary as well, because of course if you were to go to France or Quebec, you're not just going to walk around and say bonjour. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, right? You might want to talk about travel and say I travel, je voyage, I listen to music, j'écoute la musique. You have to know what they mean so that you can actually use them. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and keep in the same recording the other verbs because this wasn't too long. So there's a lot more ER verbs. These are the most common. So when you see other ones in the future, they're almost all regular. RE verbs, there aren't as many regular ones, but there's a small set. I'll show you the most common ones. In the future, you'll see a few verbs that happen to end with RE and they're not regular. And in that case, we'll learn different endings. So what we're going to do now are any verbs that end with RE, like vendre, and what to do with them. So we're going to take off the RE and we're going to add these endings. Je vends with S, tu vends with S, and il vend with nothing. So it's kind of different from the ER verbs where we're used to the only time we see an S being with je. For RE verbs, there's an S with je and tu. And notice je and tu are exactly the same. There's no difference. And these three are all pronounced the same, vend. The plural forms look like what we would expect from the earlier verbs. Nous vendons, ONS. Vous vendez, easy, and ils vendent. Again, ENT is always silent on the end of verbs. So this time we don't have a boot because ils vendent isn't pronounced the same as these three. Vend, vende. Okay? So every time you see a regular RE verb, you're going to do the same thing, right? Put these endings. SS, nothing. ONS, easy, ENT. Here are some common regular RE verbs. Besides vendre, rendre visite, attendre, perdre, entendre, and répondre. And again, we have to practice the meanings of these so we can use them. So we'll have some vocabulary practice too. And finally, ones that are kind of the most complicated, but again, once we learn one, we apply it to all of them. IR verbs such as finir. So we're going to take off the IR and je finis, IS, tu finis, IS, il finit, IT. So again, je and tu are exactly the same. And some people like to remember this as Sam sucks toes, SST. If that helps you, go for it. If you're like, what the heck is she talking about? That's fine. Plural ones are the weird ones because now we're used to seeing ONS, but before we had ONS, we've had ISS, so this is really long. The ending is ISS, ONS. Nous finissons. Vous finissez. ISS, easy. And ils finissent. ISS, ENT. So all three of these have the ONS. Easy, ENT we're used to, but ISS before that. Again, the ENT is silent, finis. So we don't have a boot here either. The three over here pronounce fini, and then nous finissons, vous finissez, ils finissent. And again, all regular IR verbs, we're going to do the same thing. So anything on this list, we can now conjugate. Finir, réussir, choisir, grossir, maigrir. And again, we want to practice this for vocabulary as well.